Today we're going to talk about the very worst thing about being a writer, which is publishing. Being a writer, wanting to be a writer, wanting to make your life about writing is really hard. There's just no path. You can't just get on a path. Like if it's your life's dream to be a doctor, that's really hard. It's going to take a lot of work, but it's like possible. It's like within the realm of possibility, and there's a pretty set path, just how to be a doctor. Oh, go to doctor school. I'm making this sound really easy, but like there's a path. That path may not be accessible to you, but it exists, it's specific. You do X, Y, Z, and you become a doctor. There's just nothing like that in the realm of writing, and I think that's why so many people who are writers don't like to use the word writer to describe themselves, because there's no finish line, there's no certificate or degree that you could get that will tell you that you're a writer. Most people, I think, consider that kind of finish line to be some publishing goal. The problem is, of course, that the goalposts move. So there was definitely a time in my life where I thought, like, as long as I just publish a book, I will feel like a writer, I'll feel successful. It won't even really matter what I'm doing for money in my actual career, which is not writing, by the way, nor is it this. This is a hobby. But like, I will feel like I've arrived, and that has not happened. I've published one full-length nonfiction book and one poetry chapbook, as well as a number of smaller things like poems and even some journalism that I got paid for, which was pretty cool. And I've since very much moved my own goalposts to, I have to publish a novel. I have to publish a novel not through like a small press, but a big publisher, and I need to publish a full-length poetry collection, which can be through a small press. That's fine. These goals are arbitrary. Nobody else made them. I made them. Because again, there is no set path. And in publishing, there are a lot of decisions that you have to make that no one else can make for you, which is, I think, why I have some publishing regrets and why I think it's very possible to wind up with regrets. Now, none of these are really that big of a deal, but I thought they might be interesting either to people who haven't published yet to kind of know, what kinds of things do people maybe regret doing, A, and B, if you would like to chime in the comments with your own regrets, I think we could have an interesting discussion about publishing. So I don't have too many regrets. There's about three, really one big one. First, I very much regret using a pen name. So for that full-length nonfiction book I mentioned, which you can buy if you would like to learn how to lucid dream, I used a pen name, and the reason why I did that, well, it had more to do with YouTube actually than anything else. So YouTube and writing have always been pretty linked for me. When I published that nonfiction book, I was making a lot of YouTube videos about lucid dreaming. And on YouTube, I decided to use a fake name for a couple of reasons. One, because I felt like it provided a little bit of protection against scary people on the internet. And two, because I hoped that it would make my YouTube channel harder for employers to find. Not that I do anything or say anything that crazy on here. I just feel like it's frustrating to not be able to control what a potential employer knows about you, right? Like you go into an interview and you present them with your professional persona that is going to be you at work, and it just doesn't seem relevant for them to see some of this stuff that's like me outside of work. Ultimately, I changed my mind kind of about both of those things, mostly about the protection. I felt like that was like I was telling myself that it provided some protection for me, but honestly, I mean, I just don't think it's that hard to dox people, and I think even if you're using a fake name, like if someone wants to find you, I take as many precautions as I can, but I don't think that was actually really protecting me. And I was doing stand-up comedy at the time, and I was posting some of that to YouTube, and so I felt like my name in the stand-up comedy scene needed to be the same as my name on here, because if it's filmed, a performance, and put on YouTube, then I needed to have the same name. But comedy is like a social scene with a bunch of my friends, and it was confusing to have like a stage name. I just got really tired of having like multiple identities. And I just wanted to be Emily again. I just wanted to have one name. So the reason why I regret using a pen name ultimately was at that point where I changed my mind. I had all of these publications that were under a different name. I ended up reaching out to a bunch of magazines and asking them if they could change my name, but if it was a print magazine, there's nothing they can do but change the name on the website, and a bunch of people understandably didn't get back to me, and still to this day I have like half of my publications are under 2 different names, and it just really bothers me. My name on Goodreads is my pen name, and I can't figure out a way to like have both names over there, and so it's very frustrating. Now, if you are not a stand-up comedian or a YouTuber, most of these things probably won't apply to you, except I can think of one, which is that, like, here's a scenario. If you decide to use a pen name and you publish a book and you want to promote that book in person, maybe locally, so like say at a public library or a bookstore, and maybe some of your friends are going to be there, or people who know you as your legal name, and then you are, you know, reading from the book written under a different name, it's like, how would you feel about having 2 different names in that space? Is that something you really want to deal with? If not, I would recommend just using your legal name. Also, is your book potentially something that could look good to an employer? Now, I feel like I still could kind of brag about my nonfiction book, even though it's uses a pen name, but it seems a little confusing for like a resume, and I find that frustrating because my nonfiction book is a nonfiction book. It's actually the one thing that I would maybe consider using in a career context because it involved a lot of research, and I think it reflects well on the skills that I use at work, but I don't really feel comfortable because of the pen name, which, you know, might just be my own problem. Oh, I've thought of another regret already. I said I had 3, I think I have more than that. Second regret is that I did a really bad job of promoting that book when it came out. To be fair, it came out like right at the beginning of the pandemic, I believe. And in addition to like everything shutting down, and also everything kind of not converting to digital right away, right? Like I feel like if everything moved from, okay, we're not doing in-person events, we're doing virtual events, if that was like an instantaneous change, I might have jumped on that and still reached out to libraries and bookstores and said like, hey, can we do a virtual event? But I feel like at the height of spring 2020, things were just like shutting down completely. And I was incredibly stressed in my own personal life, and it felt weird when people were dying every single day to be like, buy my book. So, you know, it's not really my fault that the pandemic happened, but I do kind of have regrets about how poor of a job I feel I did promoting that book right when it came out. Because that's a pretty important time for promoting your book, but you can still buy it. Third regret, I think I may have kind of rushed into publishing my poetry chapbook, which I think is a real theme of publishing regrets. There is a tendency among a lot of writers to just kind of jump on the first thing to publish maybe before they're even ready to publish, because it's your goal, you want to make it happen. And interestingly enough, I didn't have a very difficult time finding a small press for that chapbook. I say interestingly enough because I'm currently trying to publish hopefully a full-length poetry collection, or if I exhaust every small press under the sun and they don't want it, I would be willing to publish it as a chapbook. I would prefer to publish the full-length collection, but I think there's some benefits to a chapbook version because it would be more cohesive, because it would be like really tightly themed. And so I've been sending it out as both mostly a full-length and occasionally as a chapbook, and I've gotten some personalized rejections, but it's a really uphill battle, and I can't seem to find a publisher for it, even though I think it's so much better than my chapbook, which I found a small press for like pretty quickly. And so I say that I regret rushing into publishing that chapbook in part because, well, I'm kind of nervous about saying this because I love the press, Plan B Press, that put out this chapbook. They've been so wonderful and supportive, and they let me use my own original artwork for the cover. I'll put a picture of my chapbook here, which was really fun and everything, and you know, it's just been a really wonderful experience. But at this point, a couple of years after publishing it and many years after writing the majority of the poems, right? These are very much poems from like my early 20s. You know, I spent like 10 years writing them and then I published them, and since years have passed, and like I just feel like my writing has progressed so much since publishing it that I have a pretty hard time promoting it and telling people to read it. And because I do manuscript and poetry consulting for people, here's how I think of it. If I were to hire a poet to give me feedback on my own poetry, I would probably first step read their poetry to see, like, is this opinion even worthwhile? And I think that if you go and you read my chapbook, which I do recommend you do, and support me by buying it, it's not that representative of where my writing is now. Now, I feel like this is a pretty unavoidable problem. Like, if you are going to improve as a writer, then your old stuff is kind of always going to be worse than what you're making now, and that doesn't mean that it's bad, but like, how do you promote that stuff that feels like it's not representative of where you are and not really representative of who you are? Like, poetry is so personal, and I am a completely different person than I was when I wrote that, so like, I don't know. I think I'm kind of in the cringiest place with it right now because it's old, but not that old. Like, I was a big journaler as a child. I would keep a journal all the time, and like, if I were like 10 and I read my journal from when I was 7, I would think it was so embarrassing. Like, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote that. And then when I'm like 20 and I read the journal from when I'm 7, it's adorable. And it's like, of course, that you were 7, like no big deal. And I think right now I'm like, oh, I published that chapter like just a few years ago. And like, ooh, is this really who I am? And maybe when I'm like 50, I'll be like, that's interesting that that's who I used to be, right? And I guess that brings me to like a broader issue with publishing and personal work like poetry, which is just like, I feel like we can get so focused on the publishing goal. Again, kind of like, by any means necessary, whoever wants it, don't even care, just somebody please publish it, or I'll self-publish it, whatever. And like, I think it's almost honestly easy to lose sight of what the goal of publishing is, which is to have other people read your work. And like, are you really ready for that? Do you really want that? Is your work really ready for that? I don't know. I think this is why people always talk about patience, you know, being patient and persevering and being determined, but patient, you know, and thoughtful. And it's so hard, you know, when you get a yes from somebody that is willing to publish your work, you just want to say yes. And like, I mean, you really should ideally like shop around a little. Again, this is nothing against the publishers, the presses that I've worked with have been wonderful, but I have been in a hurry. Probably in part because of like this toxic youth-oriented culture where like I already feel like I'm not young anymore in the publishing world, which isn't true, obviously. So yeah, I guess my overall advice would just be to be thoughtful, to be patient, to consider the weight of all of these decisions, to recognize that they are kind of big decisions with ramifications, and you know, not rush into things, not settle, and really, really think about what your goals are. Is your goal to make money? Hopefully not. Is your goal for people to engage with your work? If that's your goal, is publishing even the best way to do that? Is traditional publishing the best way to do that? Would possibly self-publishing be a better way? Would some other form of like social media be a better way to connect with readers? I don't know. I don't know the answer to these questions, but I just think it's important to keep your eyes on not the prize, but the goal. And what is the goal? What are the components of that goal? And what actually matters? It's very difficult. It's very confusing. Anyways, those are my publishing regrets. There aren't that many of them. And as always, I do have to mention that I have a Patreon that is mainly for the purpose of people sending me one poem a month for feedback. You can also fill out a form in the description below the video and send me any number of poems, including a full manuscript. And I can give you feedback as well as tips in the publishing realm, so if you're interested.